Brianna Joy Gray hosted Seattle City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant on her podcast and Ryan Grim to debate the role of the squad in crushing this labor action. And the reason why Kshama was invited is, of course, because she is a just total badass socialist alternative member who holds down her seat on the Seattle City Council. She also put out a really wonderful article on the Socialist Alternative site. I'm going to read briefly from it, and then we are going to cut to some of that debate between Kshama Sawant and Ryan Grim, which I can only describe as a rhetorical curb stomp. All right. It is fantastic. It is fantastic. She is so kick-ass. I love Kshama Sawant. But here, this is the bottom line. On November 30th, Democratic Socialists of America posted a statement of support for the rail workers, which included this sentence: any member of Congress who votes yes on the tentative agreement is siding with billionaires and forcing a contract on rail workers that does not address their most pressing demand for paid sick days. What then of their own members and endorsed elected officials in Congress who voted yes? Like I said, most of the squad members are DSA members, and all but Rashida Tlaib voted for the bill that did not include paid sick leave. So that's what she's talking about here. What this statement implies, and what the actions of the squad definitely prove, is that these elected officials are and see themselves as part of the capitalist state, the state that acts for the billionaires, sorry, I lost my spot, and against the interests of the majority, the working class. Big bold letters. Simple as this. A socialist cannot be a strike breaker. This needs to be the end of any pretense by DSA that the squad is socialist, and should result in their expulsion from the organization. Failing that, the squad's betrayal of the working class becomes DSA's betrayal. Amen. Now, we're going to play sound from this because Brianna didn't drop video of this debate until 2 o'clock, so it wasn't long enough to give us time to clip video. So this is, I mean, you've all heard these people many, many times. You can tell the voices apart. This is Brianna Joy Gray, Ryan Grim, and Kshama Sawant.
The whole point of Pramila Jayapal's wrangling was that the TA and the sick days could not leave the House independently. They were going to leave together, and they had the vote for the TA. This is the progressives' whole point, is that they had the vote for the TA anyway, so I might as well have voted for the sick days. But you can flip that. You can say they had the vote for the sick days anyway, so why would I have voted for the TA? Exactly. And every argument could have been made about why it's horrible for the.
By the way, TA means tentative agreement, which is the agreement without paid sick days. So just like in Build Back Better, what the House did was they split the agreement into two. They passed the agreement without the sick days, and then they passed an amendment to the TA with the sick days. The squad should have voted no. First of all, they shouldn't have split the thing in the first place. This is a new thing they do now, where they split bills. Oh, we're going to pass the good version and the bad version, and hope that the good version passes the Senate, which will make the bad version better. Imagine they did that with like the fucking, Civil Rights Act. Well, we're passing 2 Civil Rights Acts, a good and a bad. And yeah, the good's not likely to pass.
We're gonna have the voting rights part here.
Right. We hope we can pass both, but we'll pass the bad one anyway. We're gonna have the
Jim Crow laws in this one.
Right.
And exactly. So if you want to vote against lunch counter segregation, you vote for the other bill.
Right. Exactly. Imagine how convoluted that would be. So the point here is that they shouldn't have split the bills in the first place. And if they did, the squad should have voted no on the bad terms, because the bad terms bill is a strikebreaker bill. That's the underlying point here. Okay, so now that we have that exposition out of the way, apologies for those who didn't know that already. Let's play this.
The Senate not to have been able to pass the sick days, and how progressive, at the same time that progressives actually demonstrated through their votes and their commitments and their articulated disagreements with the Biden administration strategy, that Biden was throwing workers under the bus. However, by voting for Biden's strategy, it neutered their ability to do so, did it not?
No. So look, if they had done what you said, like vote no, and then they vote yes, wouldn't their critics be saying, oh, that was just a performative no vote, and they still voted for the sick leave, which then is a fig leaf that covers this thing, that then allows it to get over the Senate, and then the Senate takes it out.
No, so, nobody's saying that about.
No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Brianna. This is a complete straw man argument that has no basis in reality. if socialists and progressive had voted only for a bill with paid sick leave, who in their right mind, who's on the side of the railroad workers would be blaming them for that? This is complete nonsense. And it's really just a way to, again,
wait a minute.
reflecting away from the reality that nobody in their right mind, Ryan, maybe despite being a political analyst, you thought that the Senate, there was any chance of the Senate voting yes on a paid sick leave bill. But as Brianna, you were saying, workers in their right mind understood that there was zero chance of this passing in the Senate. So what they actually did is what's performative, which is where they gave cover
Exactly.
to the Biden administration and to the Republicans to break the strike. And
Exactly. Bingo. Just want to break down what she said. What the squad did was performative because it gave cover to Joe Biden to give him the cover to say, hey, I tried to get you sick leave. So what they did was performative. It was performative on behalf of the Biden White House.
Right.
Exactly.
They went along with the White House's PR strategy.
Right. And Ryan
And
Grimm
everyone
saying,
knew
well,
it was
if
a
they
PR
voted
strategy.
no, that would have been the performative action. Well, how twisted is that? How twisted is that?
to sell out the workers. And yes, Biden did betray, and the betrayal began with the Biden administration. There is no question about that. But it is commentators like yourself who will then, any moment, whoever among the Democratic Party is in the crossfire of workers, justifiably, then those people are going to be protected. So when the fire was against, workers were angry against AOC and Jayapal, then suddenly AOC starts tweeting, and then, you all start defending her by saying, oh, well, the unions wanted it. But as I was clarifying before you came, it wasn't union rank and file. And I don't know which rank and file you spoke to, but it is just complete nonsense to say that railroad workers who are just struggling for their basic survival were somehow going to be accepting this. The reality is, again, we have to keep in mind that ultimately, when it came down to the vote, it was a very hollow situation. There was no real strategy out for the workers. So we have to keep bringing it back to the more basic question about, what is it really that allows workers to win some victories? It is actually by going on strike and having a fighting strategy. So none of this is going to provide a solution. And we on the left, I'm not talking about people like Ryan Grimm. I mean, those of us who genuinely want to defend working people, we have the obligation to call out both elected officials who have betrayed us and also the labor leaders who have betrayed us, and not play this game of deflection and obfuscation. When the blame is on AOC, they get to say, oh, it's the labor leaders. And when the blame is on the labor leaders, they get to say, oh, it was the Democrats or Biden. They are all together betraying working people.
Okay, well, I would say just go listen to the interview with the workers that Chapo posted. It's called BMWED Rank and File United. Those
Ryan,
are
one of those two workers was just on Bad Faith podcast last week.
And the other of those two workers was on Due Dissidence last week. So Chapo Trap House interviewed two workers, one of them being Devin Mance. And we interviewed Devin Mance before the poseurs at Chapo Trap House interviewed Devin Mance. All right, so we can speak to what Ryan Grimm says about Devin Mance, and this is going to be really interesting. So let's hear what he has to say, and then we're going to pause it and give our take because we talked to Devin also.
I mean, if you listen to that interview, the other point that Devin makes is that this, as far as he's aware, it's the first time using the Railway Labor Act that a PEB, like a bargain that was kind of brokered by the president, has ever been strengthened, that this sets a precedent. Perhaps it's been done for airlines, but it has never happened before with rail workers. It's always been, here it is, we're shoving this down your throat, take it. So for the House to make it actually better sets a new precedent.
A precedent for what?
So they've been
Ryan?
stalling this, that Congress can actually make a deal for workers better. And there's a reason he cares about this, and he explained it. The carriers have been stalling for 3 years, as you know, you've covered this.
Yes.
And the reason that they've been stalling is because they know that they can just jam it down their throats using the Railway Labor Act and using Congress, right? So now that has changed a little bit, because now you have a situation where the House has actually made it better. So if they're 2 years away from their next contract negotiation, those negotiations practically start now. Actually, they still have to wrap up the last one, but they're going to start negotiating their next contract very soon.
What an absurd point, that the fact that they caused a little bit of tension in the halls of Congress over sick leave sets a precedent that they better get a good contract in 2 fucking years.
Right.
What an
Yeah,
absurd
Yeah.
point. Absurd argument.
Now the carriers know that there is
yeah.
precedent that in the
They're
House,
shaking
with
now.
enough
Better not
public
fuck with
attention,
us
enough
next time.
organizing, and
We're
enough
coming for you
pressure
in
on
2
them,
years, bitch.
the House might actually make that deal better for workers. So now carriers can't just sit there and say, no, we're not going to negotiate at all. We're not going to bargain with you at all. You're just going to take what you can get.
Oh, they can't.
And so 2 years from now, and that's what
That
organizing
is certainly
about.
the
It's
message when a president
Yeah.
literally takes away your ability to
Of
strike.
course. What he's
The
saying
message
just-
is that the railroad workers are in charge.
right. Exactly.
No, what would send that message is if they strike now
right.
and shut the fucking country down.
Exactly.
That's what would send that message.
Absolutely.
built, like
How
building.
good might the deal have been if Congress were not empowered to crush the strike power that gives labor their entire leverage? What kind of bill would we be discussing if we didn't have Congress empowered by the Railroad Labor Act to swoop in and negotiate on behalf of business?
Oh, it would probably be a lot better. But
Okay.
it got 80, but it got 80 votes in the Senate and
Right.
290 in the House. So like we don't live in that world.
But now, Ryan, we are progressives on a progressive podcast that are talking about the incremental improvement, apparently, to a deal that people have been saying firmly no to, despite any other incremental improvements that have been offered up on the table, because the fundamental crux of the disagreement, the sick days, were not in it. And this is why, Ryan, people accuse you, people have accused other reporters who have been covering this, and Jamal Bowman, AOC, Jonah Furman, others, of basically neutering the power of the moment and providing cover for the establishment. Because at the end of the day, the shift in the conversation from why on earth do we have this bill that enables Biden to crush a labor action? And why does Biden get to still call himself the best labor president since FDR while crushing labor? Instead of having that conversation, vociferously argued by the squad members in the broader left media sphere, we're having the conversation. We are celebrating what are supposed to be the left flank of our political discourse for creating a machination in the House that gave cover to progressives to allow that strike crushing to happen in the first instance.
Maybe the workers don't want to be part of this fantasy play. The workers
What
like
fantasy
actually
play?
What are you talking?
So to get rid of the Railway Labor Act? Good. Let's get rid of the Railway Labor Act of 1923. Like, what are you talking about? There's no, like, who's organizing that? Coming in here after it's already been enacted and then saying it's done, and then people are going to come in on Monday morning and say they're going to get rid of the Railway Labor Act?
It is just terrible. This kind of obfuscation. It's like, moving the goalpost at every moment to, in order to keep admitting to this undeniable logic that Brianna, you were talking about, that there is no universe where you can describe this as a good thing. There was nothing good to be gained out of voting for a bill without the paid sick leave, with the TA bill, as you were saying. And I see you shifting your arguments, Ryan. Every time you present an argument, you're talking about something else. When you went on the Revolutionary Blackout Network podcast, you said that you're not arguing it's the court. You said you're not arguing it's a good thing that the squad did. And yet your overwhelming emphasis is quote unquote explaining, I'm saying putting quotes because I don't think it explains it, but you're trying to explain and defend their action. When we talk about them, you say it's Biden. When you say it's Biden, it's the Railway Labor Act, So it doesn't matter what we say. Your goal is to defend the status quo. And I have to say, more than anything else, it is just rotten to hide behind what some supposed worker said in some podcast.
Okay, this is where what she says here is brilliant, and you can tell that Shama is the real deal, who's really down with the workers, because what she says here is so perceptive, and I can say it's so perceptive because I perceive the exact same thing when I talk to Devin, and I'm sure Russell felt the same way. So let's just back this up and let's play this. It's very, very important, this last bit.
More than anything else, it is just rotten to hide behind what some supposed worker said in some podcast, and probably very likely said it in a desperation of not having had a way out, with both their union leaders having failed to organize a strike action and build for mass solidarity nationwide, and with both the Democrats and Republicans selling them out. Yeah, so in that moment of desperation, maybe a worker said that. I don't need to watch that podcast to know which side I am on. I don't need a memo from union rank and file to know which side of a strike breaker bill to be on.
Exactly. When we talked to Devin Mance, it was very obvious to me, both during the interview, before we went live, and after we went live, that there were certain things he couldn't say because you know what? He's a working guy. He's got a family to feed. He can't afford to come on a podcast and run his mouth. But you know what? We can. Shama Sawant can, Brianna Joy Gray can, and Ryan Grimm can. And so why are you using that microphone to make excuses for supposed socialist congresspeople who voted to break up a strike? I don't hold against Devin Mance for being diplomatic because he was diplomatic. He said, we thank Jamal Bowman's office for working with us and trying to get this through, right? And we even pushed back on him in person. I remember he said, something like, well, they did the best we can for us. And I shot right back. I said, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. And Russell said the same thing. So a worker who has been defeated, who has been crushed, we interviewed those guys the night that this all went down. You could see in their eyes, you can hear in their voice. Go and watch the video. It's on It's on our YouTube channel. They were defeated. You can't then hide behind them and say, well, they expressed gratitude for the squad, so why should you pile on the squad? They were just doing what they... No. They were coming from a defeated place. Look, a union is a political organization. They are unfortunately still joined at the hip with the Democratic Party. And so a working guy who's, I don't know what his exact situation is, but he appears on a podcast, he appears on shows, he appears on us, Chapo Trap House, he was on NBC as well. There are certain places that he's not going to go. That doesn't mean that you, Ryan Grimm, get to hide behind him and say, well, because he was thankful to Bowman, we should lay off Bowman. That's a chicken shit argument. And good on Shama for recognizing that. You say you can't cite a desperate worker who's just lost a major battle, who now has to play ball because of where he is as a worker and the need to balance whatever his aims are with his short-term needs of putting food on his table. You can't just take that as license to defend strike breakers. They're DSA members and they voted to break a strike. Of course, that should call for immediate expulsion from the organization. There's no question about it. It's absurd.
Yeah, you could tell when we were interviewing them, they were laughing a lot at things that we were saying that were trashing the Democratic Party and the squad, but they couldn't say it. Right. Because they still have to work.
Normally, we let it fly on the air. We don't censor ourselves. You guys know that. But in their case, yeah, we were careful not to say certain things because we don't want to get them in
cost
trouble.
them their jobs.
Right. Like, you don't want to get them in trouble. So it's not a knock on Devin that he had to be diplomatic in that spot. I get it, man. I get it.
Okay,
he's a dad, right? I mean, he's got pressures, right? But because of that, you have to take what he's saying with a grain of salt. Not that he's being dishonest, but that he's being diplomatic for the sake of keeping food on his table. And what Grimm was doing there was trying to use his appreciation for the squad's cooperation as an excuse to defend them for voting to break up a strike. Look, of course, the betrayal begins with Joe Biden, right? If Joe Biden had not called for a bill to be sent to him, then there would not have been a bill sent to him. If he called for a bill sent to him that included sick days, you know what? A lot of people who didn't want the economy to shut down would have probably just caved and put the sick days in. So, of course, it starts at Joe Biden. Nobody's arguing that. Shama even said that. Yes, of course, the betrayal starts at Joe Biden. The question is, what is your responsibility to your movement? And if these squad members join DSA and they run as carrying the banner of worker power, there is no excuse under no circumstance whatsoever to vote to break up a strike.
Of course.
The only
even if only to show where you stand.
Right, exactly. The only obvious caveat to that is if the bill that you're voting for gives the workers everything they want. Right? If Joe Biden said, you know what, we're not having a strike, we can't afford a strike. You know what, these bosses are going to have to meet every single demand of the union workers. Then you may be able to vote for that. Right? Then I could see, okay, because then you're voting to bang the gavel and say the workers win. Okay, that's not a crime. That's not a crime.
Right.
But you vote for a bill that does not meet the workers' terms. You call yourself a socialist? Are you kidding? Of course they should be expelled. And the DSA, surprisingly, has not voted to expel them. The DSA
They're
said,
really-
no, we don't like that idea. No.
Yeah, they're not clapping now. This really puts the DSA in a tough spot because this is their crowning achievement. The squad is their crowning achievement, and to disown their crowning achievement, yeah, there's a lot of I would say there's probably a lot of internal deliberation going on over there right now. Also with Ryan Grimm. Once again, I know we have people who love him. We have people who hate him. Once again, Jimmy Dore is ahead of the curve. Jimmy
Right.
Dore was
He
calling
says he's an
out
access journalist. He's a DC bureau chief. Go ahead.
He was calling him out years ago. And me and Keaton were both. I think we actually said this on the air. Like, what the fuck is wrong with Jimmy Dore? What is with Ryan Grimm? What's he going after Ryan Grimm for? And once again, every single time Jimmy Dore has said some shit that has sounded crazy or too extreme, he ends up being proven right in the end. Whatever you think about him personally, whether you like him or don't like him, I don't think any honest analysis can fail to see that Jimmy Dore has been right more often about this kind of thing than anyone else in this space.
Yeah, no. I mean, look, credit where it's due. The other thing, I mean, there's a million clips that we could have played here. We could have played this whole episode. I listened to the whole debate. It was fascinating. There was a million clips that we could have shown from this. But the other thing that I just want to close on here is that we have to dismiss this notion that there was a push, quote unquote, for paid sick leave alongside the bad bill. There's no push for paid sick. There's no. That's a word you have to listen for. When you hear politicians saying they're going to push for something, push means bullshit, right? Push means you're about to get sold out. There was no push to pass paid sick leave through the Senate because everyone knew sick leave could not pass the Senate. They knew it so much that Raphael Warnock couldn't be bothered to leave the campaign trail to come and vote for paid sick leave. He abstained. Now, if there was a possibility of passing this, don't you think they'd have called his ass up to D.C. to cast a vote? But they knew it was a failure. That's why they let him skip out on the vote.
Course.
So the idea that there was a push for paid sick leave is nonsense. There was no push. Therefore, to vote for the bad bill was to vote to break up the strike and fuck the workers. Period. End of story. To pretend otherwise is, as Shama said, just shocking and dishonest.
With Ryan Grimm, my theory would be that once you are in Washington like that, you get Washington brain. I don't even think that it's really so much an access thing with him, or from what I understand, they get paid pretty well at The Intercept for the industry. I don't think it's really that. I think once you're there, you absorb the logic of Washington. I think if you're there year after year, you start to see things from that perspective. Well, of course, it's impossible to get a vote like that. So what else could you do? It makes you think like that after a while.
Sure thing. And look, it is true that any stance here would have been symbolic in nature because there was broad bipartisan support to fuck the workers. So in the end of the day, was there anything the squad could do to get paid sick leave? No, but that's not the point. The point is, if you're going to stand with workers and build credibility with workers and build a movement underneath your candidacy and your tenure in Congress, then you have to be on the right side of issues like this. You cannot vote to break up a rail strike, period. End of story. It's not an argument. It's not an argument. And him trying to say, well, they could have voted no, yes, maybe, but they voted yes, because they saw it as a Hail Mary. That's what he said. They saw this as a Hail Mary.
He's fallen into that habit of corporate media of treating politics as a game of mahjong. It's all about the flourishes and the strategy, and it's not about the actual policies or the principles behind them. It all becomes this game of it becomes really like a court watching. In the sense of Louis XIV court, right? It's watching the royals. Oh, well, the reason that they did this is because Lady Pompadour was cited at the theater last night. And he's falling into that. I think he's been there too long. And you're surrounded by these people. And in terms of access, I don't think he's doing it for access, but when you're a Washington journalist, access is an advantage. And over time, access means you talk to these people. You're surrounded by these people. You have drinks with these people. You have dinners with these people. You absorb eventually the worldview of these people.
Right.
I think that's a lot of what Jimmy Dore detected first. And now it's becoming increasingly apparent that Ryan Grim has Washington brain.
Please clap.